I want to welcome you to the Heritage Room. Those of you who haven't been here before, I want to encourage you to look around and ask questions. I'm the curator here, which means I'm the librarian that works up here and does the programming out of the Heritage Room. We are part of the public library here, but we're not tax supported at all. And some of the people who have been here before have heard this all before. We depend on contributions, and we have a friends group, the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association, that raises money for this room and for programming like the one you're going to be at tonight. If you're interested in finding out about the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association or in making a contribution, we have a basket out by the coffee, and we have information on becoming a friend. We do send out newsletters and calendars every month on the different events, and those are on the table outside the room if you want to pick up one of those. We're presently raising money for an endowment fund. The National Endowment for the Humanities has given us a challenge grant. For every $3 that we raise locally, we get $1 from the federal government. This challenge grant would ensure the continuation of the programs in the Heritage Room. We also have a gift shop back there. Kathleen's book is in the gift shop, and I'm sure I'm saying this. I'm sure she'll be happy to sign it later if you. But also next month, December 19th, Bill Clefcorn will be here and giving a poetry reading. So you might want to mark that on your calendars. Most of you are probably familiar with Kathleen's work. She's had 5 volumes of poetry published and has had poems included in 7 anthologies that I know of. She presently teaches in the English department at UNL. Her latest book, Water Witching, was published in 1984 while she was a Fulbright scholar in Iceland. And I hope you join me in welcome here tonight.
I don't have room for everything. You are the farmer's daughter, corn-fed, apple-cheeked, a local yokel from a dirt-water town where tractors cruise the guts on Main Street and Loretta keeps tabs from the 5 and dime. You are the round little Swede, snub-nosed, tongue-tied, who rises at the crack of dawn to milk the cows, slop the hogs, and cut across the corn to school. You are the first to go to college, 100 homesick miles away, straw behind ear, manure on shoes, and a Coke date after the Kansas game where Husky the corn cobs yelled in your face. You marry the hayseed in Rotsey blue, beside graduate schools not for you, pack Sunbeam skillet and baking tin to honeymoon at the Holiday Inn, where Tom and Sharon put cornflakes in your bed, and undutiful thoughts come into your head. You are not the first to divorce. Grandmother did, and she was good, but grandmother left that city slicker, let him go straight to the dogs with corn liquor, and settle down with an old country man. Your lovers are men who never remember if you're Iowa born or Dakota bred, but they've all hit I-80 on the way to Frisco, sent corny postcards from Bosselman's Cafe. God, but I miss you. God, but it's flat. You are the ugly American, in blue jeans, T-shirts, and mirror shades. The dollar's strong, your accent's stronger, cracking gum, munching popcorn, peanut butter, chocolate bars. Why can't the Europeans take us like we are? You are home again, wiser, of course. Fine, you practice, like a salesman's spiel. The same old cornfield east of the house, Mom and Dad on the stoop with the usual joke. Always glad to see you come, and always glad to see you go. It is my conviction that my mother is the only person in the United States, possibly the world, who is totally good without being boring. And she has said goodbye to me countless times, thinking that she'll never see me again when I've gone to places at the end of the earth, like Iceland, or North Dakota, or Texas. But when I moved to Seattle, that was the place that seemed furthest away for some reason, because she thought it was kind of close to the North Pole. And it was on one of those visits home when she decided that she was getting old and she ought to make a will. And since I was home, I ought to go on a tour of her house with her to help her make out her will. And since my mother does have a sense of humor, this was not a grim process. In fact, it got to be kind of funny. If we were running around the house, she'd say, "Do you want this?" I'd say, "Nah, give that to Barbara." But after I got back to Seattle, I decided I did not want to wait to write a poem for my mother until after she died. For my mother, who lives. Healthy and sane, she speaks of dying. It's the regularity of the pension, a monthly reminder that time passes, she's old. Although staying alive's a good investment, death sounds easy, less complex for her than driving 3 graveled miles to the farmer's store or keeping my father off his tractor. The graveyard lot purchased, first come, first served, she says. Valley View offers room for 6, but we are 7. She's not forgotten our number, but is there someone she'd rather not have decaying beside her? The youngest by a decade. Am I to scrounge my own crypt? Or is it better not to have a spot guaranteed? In her sleep, Aunt Becky and Granny Addie, firm-skinned and alive, stand in her house and try to coax her away. But I didn't want to go, she says. Wasn't that a funny dream? Too practical for premonition, she tells me stories. The time they changed Amelia's name to Becky, sewing corn shucks on a dress for Halloween, and how Granny Addie returned all those snapshots before she died. Listing possessions, wondering what's valuable, she invites me to choose my inheritance. I sift through her jewel box, 50 years of accumulation, and gather my treasures. A watch, a ring, Grandma Lenerson's comb, whatever fits in small corners in a suitcase. There are other corners unfilled. I remember when she told me marriage was like a play, and we speculated which of my sisters acted the best. That was before I left at intermission. Each time I leave Nebraska, she holds my shoulders and looks at my face as if she'll never see me again. But there's less space between us than the time I chanted in Ladies' Aid, "I'm 5 and my mother is 45. In grade school, I bragged about ancestors. Jesse James, and the fellow who used to be in history books for digging out of prison with a spoon. I don't need those legends now. She can tell me 5 children were too many, and no, I won't cringe, imagining myself unconceived. We have a tradition of survival. Surrendering it to me, she goes on. I sent that poem to my mother, which is a dangerous thing to do if you write poems about people. She wrote me a letter back, she wrote me 2 letters back, which is a dangerous thing to do if someone you know is a poet, because I took those letters and I made them into a poem. This should actually be called a stolen poem, I think, because I think you'll hear that it's my mother's language, and all I did, as I'm always telling people, I just did a little editing here and there. Letter from Nebraska to the youngest daughter. And those of you who get letters from farms, you'll probably recognize that almost every letter begins with a weather report. Dear Kathy, here on the farm it's a dry October. Trees beautiful, weather pleasant, and warm and dry. Only thing, the wheat seed just lies in the dry dirt. A few sprouted and pushed through, but it's a thin stand. Nick came over to pick the corn across the skeety. Dad's share turned out to be 1 load of wet corn. The government calls this farm a disaster area, and Dad figures their payment will be a disaster. But the old soybeans came through, so that's why we can get along. I don't think I told you about hurting my toe this August. Old news, as it's all healed up now, but sore for a whole week. I dropped one of those fishbowl glass plant terrariums and cut my number 2 toe. My old eye doctor died last winter, and I worried about my eyes. But Mrs. McKillop told me about a new man in Columbus, and I can see better now. Your last poem needs some clarification. We reserved a plot for you by our side in Valley View. We didn't think anyone would care for a spot, and we just aren't the type to tell our kids we have a plot for them. We might make them mad. Oh, yes. Those unfilled corners of your suitcase are really filled with love. It is hard for me to express it. We are all well around here. Dad sold the last of his cattle. Feels lost without cattle to look at and feed. But we still get about 6 eggs per day from the old red hens. And I have my 3 cats, with more on the way, by the looks of things. Hope all is going okay for you. Love from Dad and Mother. I didn't send that one to my mother. By the time the book came out, she just shook her head. I wrote the next poem when I was living in Seattle, and for the only time in my life, I listened to friends' criticism about the poem. So I changed the title, which was a very stunning whoopee-tie-yi-o, and it's now Cattle Call. This is for my dad. Around a pasture, you won't see new tight fence. A creosote post leans out of its hole, sags the barbed wire down, and the wire mesh stretches as the cows kneel to ease their heads under, sideways, ears scraping the ground, as if they listen to what goes on below. Saliva streams out like spider silk as the gray tongue strains to enwrap the furthermost mouthful of firegrass. Dad watches in disgust. Same goddamn weeds on both sides, but they still got to go and try. Come on, kid, let's tighten her up so they don't get out this time. But like I always say, if you raise cows, you're going to chase them. If cows weren't so stupid, you'd know they orchestrated the best moment to escape the boundaries. Sunday morning, in bed till it's light, thinking of pancakes and an hour in church just to sit and someone up for water at the kitchen sink hollers, "The cows are out!" Or, after hauling bales, a cool evening bath to wash off the sticky itch, leaning back in a kitchen chair, hungry at last for fried meat and potatoes, and a huge white form sways delicately by. Forks clatter down, chairs drop. "Move the skillet, where's my shoes? Who in the hell left the cow lot gate open?" Everyone's cows got out. I asked Dad why we didn't brand. Knee-deep in skeety mud we were, stretching again the wire across the bank. Second flood that year. "Hand me a staple, kid. Branding won't keep a cow from getting out. And it's not the worry over someone stealing one that does. I never let 'em get too far. Or even mixing with another herd. I sure as hell know my cows. As the trouble when someone else's cow gets in." Hokinsons now used to turn a couple of calves in our pasture, and they'd bounce up the lane just as pretty, eating our grass and our hay in the cow lot. Ornery little cusses, I remember, weren't dehorned, fighting with the heifers. Not worth it to rile neighbors. But Mom painted something on those calves with green paint. Didn't tell me till later, never did say what she painted. Figured I'd get mad. That Irma, she's a corker. Damnedest woman I ever saw. Well, Hokinsons pulled 'em out fast, I tell you, kid. Branding's not what keeps a cow. Not in little operations like ours. No matter if they run through the mud of the plowed field or the gravel road to town, you must circle wide around them, get ahead, and wait. Maybe holding a stick to make your arms longer. Say you weigh 100 pounds. Say the cow weighs 1,000 and is running. You shout something in cow-turning language, like hike or get back. You imagine looking up at 4 hooves, printing their route over your body. You imagine Dad's anger if you let the cow thunder by. Your life depends on turning this cow. I don't know what people pray for. Dad, I suppose, prays 4 or 2, sun and rain, just enough at the right time. Mom prays the kids won't do anything bad enough to get talked about in town. And I pray when I'm frightened, bartering promises to be a better person for my long life and safety. And chasing cows, I prayed and promised most. I'm not leaving. I'm getting a drink of water. Hard work chasing cows. Because an awful lot of my students are here, bless their hearts. Of course, you know they just came out of the goodness of their hearts. Some of them did. Boy, do they get a lot of extra points for this. Because they're here, I thought I would read a poem about one of my eccentric English teachers. It seems to me that in unofficial polls I've taken of the teachers that people remember most, kindergarten teachers and English teachers are right up there for the ones remembered. Now, that's not saying anything about why, but, well, when I tell you about this teacher that I had, perhaps you can draw your own conclusions. This was my sophomore English teacher in high school, and I went to a Genoa High School. My high school class was 29, and we were what was euphemistically known as a lively class. We were holy terrors is what it was. We were getting a new English teacher that year, and of course that's always exciting. You get to figure out how far you can push her, whether you can make her cry, and things like that. Her name was Mrs. Gerber, which gave us a lot of points to begin with before we saw her. But the first day of school, when we came tumbling into the English classroom, we stopped, like those movies where everybody stops back on their heels. There, standing in front of the chalkboard, was the tallest woman I had ever seen then, wearing a red satin dress that looked like it would glow in the dark. Were you unlucky enough to be caught in the dark with her? She had on lots of jewelry which looked like, I don't know, rhinestones or diamonds, big hunks of earrings, bracelets, necklace. What else? Oh, yes. Her height was magnified by spike heels which were at least 5 inches tall. She had on, this was in the early 60s when people weren't wearing things like this. She had on nylons with decorations going up the seams. Okay. Oh, yes, and her hair changed color weekly, and we were scared to death of her. She kept us busy. For those of you who are English teachers, you might want to take notes on this. She kept us busy by having us diagram sentences for 2 years straight. We wrote in ink. If we made a mistake, we had to start over. I am surprised to this day that I can read Shakespeare because for our Shakespeare notebook, we dutifully copied every footnote in Julius Caesar. Okay. In memory of Mrs. Gerber. I remember the gloss of the dresses in peacock colors, the nylons with hearts and butterflies flourishing up the seams, the hunks of rhinestone bedecking wrists and ears. 6 feet tall in her patent spikes, she towered above the study hall, the basketball team, the coach, topping them all with a triumphant frizz of cinnamon hair. Splendid in satin and velveteen, she confided to our class the glamour of her feather boa. Lana LaBelle, my mother sniffed at the gaudy clothes, selected from that brassy mail-order catalog of frivolous apparel. Our town was used to neutral women who tinted their hair beige or brown to match their sensible plaids. Mrs. Gerber stilled our wriggling rows with her command for immaculate calligraphy. We copied the footnote to Julius Caesar, the directions in our grammar books, one misplaced conjunction in a diagram, one smear on the page would send us crumpling and tearing to the wastebasket to begin again on unmarred paper. She sat for an hour on a tack without feeling it. Who could challenge that confidence of height, that surety of jaw? Well, Dad always said those out-of-town school teachers drove like the devil. Smug in black dresses, Joni Flaherty and I went to the funeral. Sitting in the basement of the Monroe Methodist Church with the non-relation, we stared at a loudspeaker or each other, our stomachs gurgling. By the last hymn, we shook with pent giggles. Only by holding our breath could we escape past the open coffin. I couldn't look to see what she wore. Afterwards, we cruised Main Street from Scotty's filling station to the Catholic Church. Each U-turn executed the same, clean and perfect. Since I'm talking about those wonderful days, there was a rather grim tradition in my high school and those around that when a young woman was going steady, with a young man, she would keep his class ring affixed by means of a rubber band. And if you remember this, and I never did this, I knew that love was painful and painful enough without doing this. But anyway, if you really wanted to show that you love this guy, you would wrap this rubber band around real tight so it would cut into your skin, so that you would be marked forever by love. Okay. Scars. Isn't that a great idea? In high school, Mary Ann Lewis scratched G.R. on her wrist with a common pin. Kept on Gary Rubin's class ring with a rubber band wrapped to cut deep into her flesh. When we break up, I'll still have the scar. You wonder, and I'm embarrassed to say, this scar's from falling up the steps. I sent the Cahill kids in for Kleenex, a Band-Aid, then a towel. Well, I searched for the missing piece of skin to patch the slice on my thigh. But the youngest kid tattled, and Mother poured peroxide on the gash, and a neighbor lady insisted, shouldn't that have stitches? And I hollered, no. And the blood bubbled up with the foam. And Mother said no. She let me have the scar. 3 things I ask about: scars, old loves, and land. Whatever marks or heals a surface. How steep shall we make the hill? How undamaged the site? I tell you, I bruise easily, but you find and kiss each dark circle, and safe as a leaf, I drop down the slope of your arms, pleased, momentarily healed by this common miracle of our skin. Okay. Actually, I think falling in love is rather more like making wine. When I lived in Seattle, there were all kinds of blackberries available, free. And one summer I tried making wine, and it worked. My plants grew real well. There was a lot of carbon dioxide in the house, and it was really nice coming in smelling all this. So I wrote this poem, The Process. After the exhilaration of choosing and crushing the ripe berries, blend and catalyze like an alchemist, this is the next step. To strain and siphon and watch the wine churn to a new excitement. The glass jugs line the table like pawns. The game is incomplete. I drop to my knees and study the bubbles that foam the surface. Turbulent as a new love, this fermentation. The wine will rest and clear. The scent of yeast, familiar as a warm body, leaves the house. Bottled and corked, the wine ages, out of reach on a top shelf. At times, a bottle rebels and blows a cork, spattering wine in the cupboard on its neighbors, too much wild yeast in the air, and in me, bubbling my veins, stirring my tongue, I could explode in your arms. Where can I store myself to settle and mellow? In a few months, I will invite you to my house to taste the blackberry wine, dark and comfortable in the mouth, like the expectations of an old friend. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to read in Nebraska again, so I think I'm going to go ahead and read this. This is This is a section from a new book I've just finished entitled Death of a Regional Poet, which is a long poem, which I cannot explain at all. So I'm going to read an excerpt from it, where the narrator of the poem muses on the home state of her heroine, which happens to be Nebraska, and the hometown of her heroine, which happens to be a little town named Florence. Guess where I got that? Okay. This poem is guaranteed to offend almost everyone, so I'm warning you. Okay. Beef state, corn state, gateway to the west, the rhythms of a football cheer excite the breast of weary exile, fortune's guest or slave, Ben Gunn passing the night with dreams of Lincoln mostly, that certain zest of dust and sweat and mauled mosquito bite. The best of worlds, Nebraska, colder than Iceland's winter, of possible worlds, Nebraska, hotter than Hecla in summer. Nebraska, if a Russian woman bore that name, we'd love her, a poet says, but we spare our love from much that's Russian, Oklahoman, or made in Taiwan. Our love stays put in Holdridge or Tarnov. Nebraska, to know thyself, know thy state. Know them both, I'll wish you mazel tov. But queried one of New York ancestry, Nebraska? Ah, yes. But does it have a history? Thou fool! O ye of little knowledge, repent. Recall the Oregon, Overland, and Mormon Trail, the Conestoga wagons whose tracks still dent Nebraska earth, pony expressors with mail for Buffalo Bill, the Homestead Monument, and if appreciation still seems to fail, read out the slogans en route to Pioneer Village from scores of billboards that tout the life idyllic. Our native sons are William, Jer, and Hank. That's Brian, Ford, and Fonda. I suppose we're prouder of the last. Our Brian walked the silver plank with silver feet, but 3 times took a powder. Forensically, they say he held top rank, but in elections, gold and banks talk louder. And while these sons went out to change society, our native daughters stayed home and wrote the diary. And some wrote more. May Allen still remembers the time she ran to Mari Sando's door with sandwiches and other tasty provender and instructions from her mother to scold, implore the starving girl to eat and encourage her to rest a moment from her labors sore. And Cather worked as hard to be a winner, but seldom had to go without her dinner. We had a laureate, J.G. Neihart, Wordsworth of the Plains, and even more unread. With rhyming couplet he shaped his epic art, a page or two and the readers left for dead. But the work that really got him down the charts was taking down what Black Elk said. His wife gave up her famous French instructor, devoting her life to capturing John in sculpture. Our senator of the 70s, Roman Ruska, had for unconvention some animosity, the stock and trade of a genuine Cornhusker. When Carswell's skill was questioned, R got crotchety, and the shot he fired from his verbal musket gave the world, "What's wrong with mediocrity?" This did no good for Nebraska's reputation, but denied the Nixon man his confirmation. A man ahead of his time. In those old-fashioned days, we still had hope for excellence, and leaders for whom the words liberal compassion were not a filthy slur. Their intelligence and reason together would a world refashion where people lived together nicely without violence. Say it now. What's wrong with mediocrity? And hear yourself praised for superiority. Say I'm cranky. Say I'm old. Say that skinny women, smart in business suits, depress me. A vegetarian gourmet, I try to trick my chocolate tooth with fruits and carob. A former sylph élancé, my shapes become mature and absolute. still, in a holy grail of innocence, I would believe. And thus I moved to Florence. There the cornfields trim the tidy boundary of the town. Wagons, trucks, and tractors wait at the elevator to spill their amber bounty until its silver walls bulge, satiate, and the sun-warmed insects buzz drowsily around the garden flowers until late in the evening, when silence blesses town and farm and gentle night settles down. And in the spring, the farmer's husbandry fills pasture and straw is shed with tender young lambs, piglets, chicks, and calves that bleat, squeal, and cluck in Wordsworthian tongue, filling the air with a mild cacophony whose delights the poet has not left unsung. Ah, the rural life waxes lyrical, but I believe the chores are not so ethereal. We, who grew up romantic instead of rural, and wept when Michael lost his son to the nasty city, are apt to see a constable mural in the outhouse concealed by Shelley-esque blasted trees, whose leaves in the sun are mother of pearl, or the pastured bull that grazes, calm and classic. Perched on the fence, I admire marriage and farming, but to get in there with them, I find alarming. Okay, back to the nice stuff. Although with this poem, I declare a moratorium on grandmother poems after I read it. Grandmother's Garden. I'm going to read 2 poems more. As she loved harvest, when the final ear hit the bangboard. As she loved the exquisite snip and tie of huck embroidery. As she loved her children, quiet in Sunday best. As she loved all beauty and the reward of rest after work. She loved her flowers. And when he took a hacksaw and cut wide swaths like a sigh through grain, slicing high the stems of tulip and iris to make impossible even a salvaged bouquet, she turned back to the house and busied herself with some kitchen task to wait for the child who ran from the shattered blooms, her small fist clenched on a few ripped petals, her breath lost in the flattened bed of bouncing bets. "Grandma, he's killing your flowers." And grandmother winked. Yes, winked, as if to say, "I'm not angry, but don't let on to Grandpa. If he saw I didn't mind, it'd hurt him more than whatever hurt it gives to me. Not that he regrets the farm, but with nothing to resist him, he misses the zest to fight. You see a cruel act, but you'll play out your part in dreams cut down, arranged for another's delight. The dry whiff of long-pressed hopes. The plant still lives. He knows they grip the earth, tough and stubborn as weather, or himself. You won't catch him pushing up the mazes of their roots or kicking destruction into their plucky stems. Even this violence is a mask of harvest. Dry your tears and remember. Plant flowers, child. Plant flowers and tell this story. I have a traditional poem that I end every reading with. Some of you can say it along with me, I think. This all got started when I read a sonnet written by the New York poet Marilyn Hacker. And at that time, I was a product of the East-West split. And when I read these words, "Oh, how I wish there were more boozy women poets, new man, new book, wit and kitchen noted for flavor," I decided that I knew an awful lot more about boozy women poets than Marilyn Hacker did, so I ought to write her a poem back. And since she had written a sonnet, I had to do my homework, so I got out my poetry handbook, and I wrote a roundel, which is a French form and has a tight rhyme scheme and a refrain. This is Roundel on a Sonnet by Marilyn Hacker. "We need more boozy women poets," I read. The whiskey blurs, confuses me, near enough to accepting it. But first, we need more booze. And then define the crucial term, to booze, drinking to excess. And there we've set the standard to join our muse of bourbon-in-hand women poets reciting sonnets in colorful bars, and not just sonnets, but bawdy pantoums and tough lyrics, to lose poetess forever. But hell, we don't need more poets of any kind. We need more booze. Thank you.